Ready to go. Alrighty, I call to order the Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee meeting for Friday, November 17th. I'm filling in today as the sitting chair since Board Member Bolton is not able to be here today in person, although she is online watching us, keeping a close eye on all of it. I'm sure be willing to make comments if necessary. Let's, in true Board Member Bolton fashion, we can go around the room introducing ourselves, starting with Rob, but also give the instructions for anyone who would like to make public comment.
Good morning. My name is Nanette Haygood, and I'm the Federal and State Programs Manager for grants.
Morning, everyone. Michael Gustin, Assistant Treasurer.
Evan Ashley, Director of Financial Reporting and Transparency.
Good afternoon, Dr. Kareem Moffitt, CPS Board Member.
Brandon Craig, Board Member.
Emily Bell, AFSCME Local 32.
Michelle Dillingham, CFT Local 1520.
And our General Counsel has just arrived. Perfect timing. Alrighty, now that we have everybody here, I think we will start with our agenda, going through our monthly reports. So we'll turn it over to Kevin.
Sure. So as we talked earlier, we didn't bring hard copies today, but it is in the board docs, and Rob will pull it up for us. So we'll go to probably about the third slide. Yeah. So that's where kind of give a summary, but I'm going to just go through each one and talk briefly about them. So we'll go on to the next two slides. So general fund. So similar to last month, as we've talked about, obviously our cash balance is lower in comparison to the last 2 years. A big part of that was the spending levels for last year and, where we are at this point. Encumbrances are a little bit higher, and that's, I think, once we got permanent appropriations in place, now things have been encumbered for the full year, and so that's where those are at right now. Next slide is revenue. Just showing you in total by year. At this point, we're 43% of our revenue, which is basically half of our tax collection for the year. And then some of the, like TIF and CRAs typically come in more in the second half of the year. So that 43 is on target for where we expect to be at this point. Next slide shows a breakdown by source. So the blue category is the taxes. So again, pretty consistent from last year. State Foundation is up about $6 million. We did get a little bit of a catch up once ODE, Department of Workforce, Department of Education and Workforce. They did their October true up, which brought some of the other elements up. So we hopefully you'll see that continue to grow. All other revenue, again, pretty consistent with where we expect to be at this point. Next slide is expenditure comparison. Another thing is I've mentioned last month, I guess it was a written report, but comparing to the difference with the school-wide pool is what that yellow part is trying to capture, because in those years at this point there were expenditures that were in school-wide pool. They're now in general fund. So if you look at that taken together, I mean, it's pretty comparable to where we were last year. And then the percentages shown there are just for the general fund portion, excluding that school-wide piece. So we're a little bit higher, but in part it's because of that. Next slide. This was a new graph that we had added just to try to break down expenditure categories a little bit. You can see the blue again is salaries and benefits added together. When you compare that school-wide pool piece, it's fairly consistent with the prior year. And then all other expenditures, obviously a lot of categories were pulled together there. The 53 million, the pink that shows up in 21, or FY22, just for comparison, when we're fully running school-wide pool. So by breaking it down this way, it's showing up. It kind of jumps out as an anomaly. Next slide is unallocated budget. So we're just trying to track in terms of what is remaining in the salary and benefit lines. Obviously, we hope to spend those out. We know we have vacancy issues and those kind of things, but we basically are showing that as all committed. And then what we've actually spent and what is encumbered to date. So the remaining unallocated at this point, the end of October, was 4%. Compared to last year, it was at 8%. So I think things are a little more allocated at this point, obviously. And showing what this is using total working budget, which is the current budget of 609 plus the carryover encumbrances. Next slide for that is, we started doing this year just to report out on the ESSER status, kind of doing that same thing. And at this point, it's looking like 14% is not tied to salary and benefits remaining and is not encumbered at this point. But I know that that's something the grants team and others are monitoring, and they'll give a further report on grants as well.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
You got a lot of slides here. I don't want to forget, to be honest with you. I'm
Sure.
getting old, so can you go back to slide 8?
Sure.
So expenses,
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at 146.8, significantly higher than
So that's the budget column. The 146.8 is the budget for all other expenses. The dark greens, did I say blue? I don't know. That's the light green is budget. The dark greens are actual for each year. So for this year, we've spent 44. Our budget for that category is 146.
okay. So that's kind of like where we are right now.
Yeah.
Projected is the 146.
Correct, for the full year, the full fiscal year.
And so am I understanding when you make the comparison of last year, this time we were at 8%, is that at this point last year, or in totality we were at 8% last year?
Are you talking from the other
On
slide?
the other side, I'm sorry.
Okay. 30%.
You're on slide 7?
So, hold on. I'm trying to go back and forth.
Yeah.
While I'm asking my question. I thought you said, so on slide 9, I think it's for the unallocated,
Mm-hmm.
for comparison at
Oh, gotcha.
October 31st, the total was 54, or 8.4% of the total budget. Is that's comparison from last year, right? And
Right.
that's the total was 8, or was it at this point in time last year it was 8?
At this point in time last year, the yellow slice, which is the unallocated, was actually 8% of the total working budget.
Okay.
And this year, the unallocated is only 4. So we've been trying to track that to show that, trying to, as a whole, be better about that.
I got it. I just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify that part. So, go ahead. Now we can keep.
Okay, cool. Okay, and then so we talked about ESSER, basically the same thing, same type of thing. The next slides will be preschool. So again, which I guess this was in the written report, I forget, these months fly by so fast. But one of the things we're doing this calculation based on the 3%, and we know CPP has proposed the 10, and that'll all come later. So one of the things we did note, actually it's on the next slide, is what that would look like if we were to use the 10% for this year. But this is calculated based on the 3% increase over last year.
Kevin, just before
Yes.
we move forward, just wanted to note, like this year, and we know that preschool numbers kind of are a rolling number, so it's kind of this month it could be one number, next month it could be totally different.
Yeah.
But we are kind of hitting kind of a plateau point there, right? In that 900 to, I mean, we're actually down a little, around 50 students in comparison to last year. Are we expecting a trend as to what kind of a maxed out number of students would be under School Promise, or?
So this is the number of students that receive tuition assistance. So yes, it does calculate out lower from 993 to 942 at that point, that moment in time at the end of the month. So at the bottom here, I indicated 1,992. That was the total all funding preschool compared to 2013 last year. So that's in total is only a difference of about 20 students.
Yeah.
But I would say based on what I've seen to this point, we probably are kind of plateauing at that level.
And then I think it's my reason I was asking the question also was in the follow-up is the dollar amount that's attached to that level of funding is something that we also are looking at as part of our larger conversation around Preschool Promise and what we will have to do in the future with it. But there is a point at which we only have so much funds within our abilities to pay for tuition. Is there a number of students that kind of equates out to between the?
I honestly wouldn't have a good answer for that, I don't think.
But just to clarify, this is just the number of students that are receiving assistance.
Correct.
So we could still get 1,000 more students and none of them need assistance.
Right.
Or we could get 1,000 and they do need assistance. So that's important to note that this is tuition assistance that we're paying.
Yeah.
And so, you know, again, to something that we should, I know we're going to have a later conversation from General Counsel on this, but I think that's something else that we have to kind of be monitoring is our ability to provide assistance while not every student gets the same level of assistance. And so there's other variables that affect that. We may end up at a point where there's a kind of range that's the comfort range that we can kind of stay forward with. So, but keep going.
Sure. I did notice, you know, there's the number of enrollment days was lower this year compared to last year. So I don't know exactly what to attribute that to. That's something we can follow up on as well. Next slide is kind of just a financial recap for preschool expansion. For one of the key, well, you see the tuition assistance there. We budgeted 6.6. At this point, we've spent 1.6, or we've calculated that to be 1.6. And then for United Way, the budget of payments this year, net of the carryover that they had, is 8.9 million. And we made the first payment on that, the 3.4, and I believe the second payment is going out this month as well. The other things are relatively, you know, flat compared to the prior year.
That payment was at the 3.
Yeah, I know there was discussion about holding the difference, and I honestly am not involved in those conversations really, but I do know that the $3.4 million has been remitted to them. So I think that's all I have for those.
I think the next state in federal grants.
So yeah, any other questions about Kevin's part before we jump to grants? Okay. Yeah, so I did want to introduce Nan Hagen. Yeah, she's the new grants manager. So you've been in your job, what, about a month probably? 2 months maybe? Yeah.
Time is going so fast.
Yeah.
So 2 months and they made you come to a budget finance and growth meeting?
Yeah, the lay of the land.
Just throw you in.
But I told her she didn't have to present today. But Rob, if you go to the next slide.
She's been with it.
Yeah, she's been here, I think,
So
what,
I have
9
been in the
years?
treasurer's office for 9 years this month, so it's just a transition.
She was an accountant, she was in grants, she was in financial technology, she's made the tour of our office, so.
All right. Building up growth from within.
Yeah. Yeah, we do like to promote from within. All right, so just to give us an update on grants, so, you know, as of the end of October, that was the 4th month of our 15-month grant cycle. Our spending goal overall is about 23%. You can see there, public schools, roughly about half of our public school grants, so those are the state and federal grants that we're going to talk about, are meeting their goal. Overall, they're about 29% spent, encumbered, which is good. And then non-public, so these are the grants that we manage, all the non-publics. Most of them are meeting their goal, and they're spent about 35%. Good. Big things are, we're doing just to clean stuff up. When we filed, the other thing we talk about are project cash requests. So one of the things people don't know is the way most of our state and federal grants work is we spend the money and then they pay us back.
Mhm.
And so we issue, it's called a project cash request. We do those monthly. And we say, here's how much we spent, and then the state remits the money back to us to make us whole. So they work on a reimbursement basis. You want to go to the next slide, Rob? Here's kind of the graph of how that looks, the 3-year trend. You can see we are ahead of last year, which is awesome. Goal would be to stay ahead of last year the entire year, but yeah, I think we've definitely caught up from July and August, and we're accelerating, so that's a good thing. Next slide. One of the things we wanted to start doing for these reports is calling out the titles. These are usually the grants that people have the most investment in, between Title I to Title IV. So just to give an idea of where we're at, we're up and down, like Title I, Title I-A, which is our basic, about 26% spent or encumbered, which is good. Title II, we're doing really well on. III, we're doing really well on. Not as much money, but we're doing well spending those. And then Title IV is the one we're going to put some focus on to kind of catch up. So there's some, yes.
I'm gonna go back to slide 4, which was.
Yep, sure.
What's been the change to make it more efficient, or at least make it better?
Right. So a couple of things. I think Jen shared some of this in last month's meeting, which went to the grants deep dive. Some of it's just education, right? The constant education process. I think especially, coming out of school, I'd pull into the individual grants. It probably took a year for people to understand what was going to be approved and what wasn't. I think we did a better job budgeting this year. And the initial thing of kind of laying out the budget for people and getting them thinking about it. Obviously, doing more in personnel sometimes is helpful because that personnel spend is constant. So if it's between personnel and non-personnel kind of comes and goes. Personnel is going to be a check every 2 weeks. I think all those things are good.
Because it really made me pause and concern me that we were returning title money.
Mhm.
That makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
And to me, borderlines of responsibility. So I think we needed to do more awareness, and Jen talked about some of the things. And so I was wondering if those things have been put in place, and this is not differentiated between the titles on this particular slide, but I'm wondering, are we doing more education in schools? Are they more clear on how they can spend the money? Are they spending it earlier? Like, what are you all doing to help with that?
I think so. I think Nan's had some good ideas from kind of the jump when she came in about educating schools. We actually did, was that yesterday we sat down with ODE, our ODE advisor, and she shared some stuff with us, kind of a deep dive. And so I think we're looking to repackage that, and push that back out. But it's a constant education process. I know anytime we talk to principals, it's one of the first things they bring up. Hey, what can I do with my title money? Can we do this? Can we do that?
And are you finding large districts like us are having the same problem with utilization of title funding, having it all being spent, and what's that average? Like, are we pretty comfortable that we're returning, or we're not spending so much, or are we trying to do like everybody else?
So I don't have a perfect answer. I know I did do I did have that conversation with our OD advisor, and she said, first of all, you're not the only urban district. I don't know that she was going to tell me exactly, I don't know if she's going to share everyone else's business, but she's like, I'm having this conversation with other urban. Well, the same thing. The issue is, titles are very restrictive, right? And really the more, there's a lot of rules, and so you have to really think about it. It's really on the planning side, I think, more than anything.
And I'm asking these questions so that the public can understand. when we say title money, everyone wants to be a title school because they think that they get more money. And then some, on a basic level,
Yes.
that's true. But there are so many more restrictions and responsibilities that there's reasons why some of this is not being spent
Yeah.
as efficiently.
Yeah,
I just
so,
kind of wanted to ask.
yeah, so if I can do my soapbox, so the high level soapbox is, the federal government's position is that education is the job of the state, right? And so the way, it plays out in title because they expect the state and us, to fund all the basic needs of education, right? And so all of this money is supplemental to what you're doing. And that's the number one thing, is it's a supplement. And Title I is really for economically disadvantaged students and to supplement their education beyond what the district already provides. And so that makes it tough. Our district provides a lot, through our general fund. We have some really innovative programs. And so, then how you add on with title is an important conversation.
My next question.
Yes.
Was in the title on the next slide. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Slide 5.
Mhm.
Under Title 4,
Yes.
it's the new director of PSC now in place.
Yes.
Explain that part.
Yeah, so that is the positive school culture team. I know they've had some turnover there. Some of the underspend we noticed was in salaries, right? I mean, they kind of did the dive, and when you have vacancies, you have a couple of vacancies, obviously spend the salaries. So,
I was
but
wondering about
yeah, there's a new director in place. I'm sure we'll reach out to her and start talking about, kind of ramping up.
And to Dr. Moffitt's
Yes, sir.
point, I think the reality is we do see this nationwide, that every large major district struggles with spending Title I dollars. And in large part, it becomes because of the limitations on what you can spend Title I on. And especially in districts where we have varying levels of Title I schools, right? So we don't just have Title I high schools. We have Title I elementary, or in some places we have middle schools. They may have Title I middle school, but not a Title I high school. So what you spend it on, important. I know we've talked about it for at least the last 2 years, which I'm glad to hear you all are doing a lot more of, which is the educating the schools to actually spend the funds early, as opposed to waiting till the end to try and spend all the things you were going to do. Because I know that's historically been part of the problem, is that it's been budgeted, but not actually spent.
Right.
So
Right.
it's good to hear you all doing that. So we'll let you keep going along here.
Thank you. So next slide, please, Rob, is the famous ESSER blocks. Right, we've seen this a lot. The two left blocks are program to date. Two right blocks are current year. This is spent and encumbered. So roughly $44 million of unspent, unencumbered. A lot of that, some of that will be salaries for sure. To go back to Kevin's presentation, one of the things we looked at, that unspent, unencumbered pie in ESSER. I mean, one of the things right off the bat is we have like $4 million, reserved for summer scholars, right? Well, you're not going to do anything with that money until spring, when you start figuring out, who's going to teach and what other programs you're going to have. So that's one of the reasons that money is not touched. It's not planned. It's planned, but there's not an encumbrance for it yet.
And when we say not encumbered and not spent, it doesn't mean it's not budgeted,
Right.
right? So we're saying these are just things that at this point there is no bill for us to kind of plan on what it'll cost based on these different factors, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons when Kevin does his pies, he breaks out that reserve for payroll, because that really helps you understand that pie. Because otherwise, there's this huge amount of money that looks like it's out there, but really, it needs to be reserved for salaries and benefits.
We passed an ESSER budget.
Mhm.
That approved,
Yep.
right? So
Yep, it's on the website.
sometimes it's there for people to know. We have it budgeted.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, so next slide. To go along with that, and we always talk about ESSER as a block. It's really not. There are separate grants. So we're going to continue doing this slide too every month. So again, this is, and all the things that are grayed out are the ESSERs that have won. All right, so ESSER 1's gone now, ESSER 2's gone now. The ARP IDMB and RVSE are gone now, they're spent out. So what's in bold is what's left. And so we can kind of see where we're at. So
Will those things go away when ESSER It's not like the homeless 1 and 2.
Mhm. Yeah, they're specific, yeah, ESSER homeless grants.
Thing
So.
by September.
That is a really good point.
Spend by September.
I really kind of want to make the public, we talk about ESSER and a block, but this is a great slide to demonstrate that it encompasses many things and these things will go away. So we have to make those decisions about how to replace them and if.
Absolutely.
Keep going.
Okay, and if you go to the next slide. All right, so you want to take a deep dive into CRA stuff. I know Jen has talked about this forever, so she's probably sad she's not here to do this, but next slide, please. So first thing is we always talk about CRAs as the acronym. It's called Community Reinvestment Area. Just for the public, these are basically an economic development tool. These are parcels that get a tax abatement for folks who renovate or build new buildings. Go to the next slide. There are 2 different types of CRAs. These are agreements between the city and the property owners, and we're a part of it as well. There's 2 different rates, right? So there's a 25% rate and a 33% rate. I think it was January of 21 when that changed. I'm looking at Dan. he was very involved in it. But you can see most of our CRAs are in the old rate. Go to the next slide. A lot of data here. I'm not gonna get too deep into it. The one thing I think is interesting is the change in year range. So if you look at the top kind of grid, the new CRAs, right? So the 33%, those are all basically 13 to 19 years in those buckets. There's hardly anything outside of those years. Whereas the old way, they were much more split all the way from 5 years all the way over 20. So definitely the new ones are all kind of falling into a certain. Dan, do you want to say something?
I mean, the only thing I'd add is that there's no doubt that in the months, weeks leading up to the expiration of the old agreement, the fast-tracked and expedited lots and lots of agreements with developers that we are still living with and will continue to live with.
Yep. Which is a good segue. If you want to go to the next slide. This is just the pie chart breakdown of the data in the last slide, and you can see again most of our money comes from the agreements that are between basically 13 and 20 years, right? The 2 different types of agreements. Most of our money comes from there. Most of the agreements come from there. If you hit the next slide, to go to what Point just said, you can see there's some expirations. This is kind of 2 tables of expiring versus new, right? So we're getting more each year than are expiring. And kind of the good news is the lower rate ones are expiring, the newer rate ones are coming on. So that is a good thing. Obviously, every one of them has a different value, so it's not as clean. Next slide. So there are 3 for approval that we need to talk about. You should have this printed out as a piece of paper too in front of you. It's a separate piece of paper, but 3 new ones for this year. One's commercial, one's a new hotel, and one is a 9 apartment building. And you can see the annual revenue and the total there. Okay, next slide. This is kind of our last couple of years revenue. I know there's a lot of data on this slide. Good news is we collect almost everything. You can see how much we build per year for around 10 million a year. Kind of goes back and forth. And again, agreements come on, they roll off, so these numbers change a little bit. You obviously get new ones. So.
I know we had a conversation, I think it was last year, and I think maybe Dan probably remembers better than I do, but around our effectiveness in collecting with regard to kind of communication from the city. And so we reached kind of better ways of managing that relationship as well.
Yeah, I haven't looked into it recently, but every time I have, this is actually a relatively easy agreements. These are relatively easy agreements to enforce. does if the developer slash taxpayer is not paying the reduced payments for the CRA. The result is that the CRA agreement can be terminated, and then they're forced to pay the full tax. So it has always been my experience that those payments are, regularly made on time, and if not, that we have a good relationship with the city to say, then the CRA goes.
Okay.
That's always been my experience, but if that's ever a problem,
Yeah.
it's more a matter of making sure that we keep the city up to,
And that's really to my more to what I was thinking about was that I know we had conversations, at least I believe it was last year or earlier this year, about us just maintaining knowledge that we in the communication back and forth with the city about whether or not something's actually been paid, whether or not.
I would say our AR supervisor, Ben Heckert, has done a good job of creating a relationship with the person at the city. I can't think of his name right this second who does that work, and they have a very regular back and forth flow of
That's great.
information. So, yeah, and so that's been helpful for sure. All right. Next slide, we're going to talk about our TIFs, for tax increment financing. This is kind of a slightly different economic vehicle where a group of parcels is put together in a taxing district. The increment money, so the property owners still pay their original kind of property taxes. The increment gets diverted, and then the cities and municipalities can use that money for improvements, and then they make payments to make us whole. So there are a bunch. Next slide, please. Bunch of TIF projects, and so we asked for a list. The city provides a list. You can click through the link there. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's 36 districts just in the city of Cincinnati, and then the townships around here have them, and Amberley Village. But basically any municipality can set one of these up. If you go to the next slide, Rob. And here's our payments received. City is by far most of the money we get, obviously. You can see by the pie chart or by the graph they are. But yeah, I mean, we get about 26 million a year of these payments. So it is not an insignificant source of money. And then just the last slide here, it's kind of just a five-year history. You can see the revenue from the city is increasing, pretty steadily, which is a good thing. The other ones are kind of flat at this point. So.
All right. And then are there any questions about?
Yeah, I think that's it for TIFs.
All right. Well, I think that's all from the financial reports at this point. I think the next few slides go into another topic.
Yes.
So, the next thing on the agenda was a board update on the board budget role and budget roundtables. I am not certain specifically what Ms. Bolton would want us to discuss on this part. I will just, for the folks the many millions of people who are watching right now, just to reiterate that the roundtables are scheduled. There's actually, I guess, one that's going to be happening now.
It is happening now, yeah.
But that there's a schedule of them up on the district's website, and please, if you're able to attend one and provide your thoughts and feedback and ideas, it'd be appreciated. So we'll move on to the preschool agreement updates. General Counsel.
Sure. Thanks. So on Wednesday at the Committee of the Whole, the board had, I would say, a robust discussion of kind of where everybody is with respect to the preschool promise agreement. What we gathered as an administration was there were a few things that I think all board members were relatively in agreement about, and the current draft of the agreement, which again, Preschool Promise wrote and provided to us. We're going to update that agreement with some of those kind of themes that it seemed like all board members were aligned with. I'm going to provide the draft back to the board, make sure there's alignment on that before we produce it back to preschool. That's where we are. Glad to take any further feedback on that. That's sort of where we ended.
think that sounds about right.
Yep.
No,
Yes, but they're for different area.
I'm-
Oh, okay.
We're still.
To your point, or to your thought there, General Counsel Hoying, one of the things I will say is I think there were like things that were structural things to the agreement as far as like roles, responsibilities, those type of things that were things that are like one category, and then the others were really the actual application of the work kind of deal. And so I think there are a lot of ones that the superintendent and treasurer also brought to light that I hope we will all see kind of reflected in there, because I think there was a shared agreement from all of the board members that, for instance, the role of the treasurer on the financial working group, like things like that were more structural things that we've been doing already as a way to keep to be a partner, that I think were easy ones that we can add into what was either left off by mistake, and so I look forward to seeing the document you are
Well, sure.
put together.
I'll have our part done, a draft ready by the end of today. I do want the superintendent and treasurer to have the opportunity to see it before I share it out into the superintendent's PC that today.
Yes.
So as soon as I get feedback back from them, I'll then share it.
All right.
Right?
I'm kind of looking forward to the joint meeting.
Right.
And I think I said that very clearly.
Right.
I think it's great for us to come together and share ideas, but I really am interested in more of what the broad groups are feeling versus our individual representatives. Not saying that they're not representative, but I think that there's benefit for the community to see both of us. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
I am going to assume, since no one is here from HR, that we will table the benefits audit progress update, unless, Lauren, do you have any wise insights on that? Alrighty. So, Mr. Guston, you're back up.
All right. Rob, if you'll go to the next slide, please. So yeah, so I wanted to bring back the donation and crowdfunding policies. Next slide. So kind of as we've kind of pictured it, for sure, like donations is kind of like the overall thing, and crowdfunding is a small subset of that. That's the way I kind of think about it, So everything crowdfunding is donation, but not every donation is crowdfunded. So good way to look at it. So, and I think we talked about last time, the auditor of state, put out a recommendation, every district have a crowdfunding policy. Probably do that. Dan's team did a really good job, and Lauren's team actually both did really good jobs of doing research, looking at other districts around us, and trying to create a policy. You look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I think those drafts have been shared, I think, with the
Yes.
finance committee this morning.
Yes, they were
So,
last month.
policy committee this morning, we also drafts with the policy coming. The direction we said is that the finance committee would move back to us when they were ready. Not sure if there's any discussion still needed. The one point I think that was sort of an open point was on the gifts policy. I don't know if this was talked about last time.
Yeah.
At what stage the
I think it's the next slide.
Go
Oh,
ahead, hit the next slide, Rob.
No, you're fine, Dan.
You're
Keep
fine,
going.
Dan. No, you're fine.
Keep going.
You're rolling.
Actually, it's
Yes.
and the board it is a requirement that donations be received by the district, and I believe at the current time there's nothing in board policy that says. Board policy suggests that every donation should be. And here I go. I will switch to this one.
Is that better? Testing, Rob. Okay. Under current board rules, I think every donation the district receives sort of is supposed to end up in the treasurer's report. That's most districts we've seen have some minimum threshold for gifts that they allow the administration, the superintendent, the treasurer to sort of receive without going through a formal board, going through the board's process. So that's, I think, the one open issue. Columbus uses $1,000. Mike, you guys have done some research. I think IRS recognizes gifts of $250 So I don't have any strong feelings about what that threshold is.
So one of the things in the IRS thing, thank you. I think Lauren's team did some research there as well. Is the $250 threshold? $250 threshold is to notify the donor back. So if you're a nonprofit, you have to let the donor. You basically have to give them a receipt, for their tax purposes. So
I think when we had the
Go ahead.
discussion, it was about whatever the IRS rule was when we had the
Yeah.
discussion policy
Mhm.
last month. But I do want us to identify what that number is going to be. Because I think that there are donors that are very clear, they want it to make sure that it goes to where it's gonna go directly without district involvement.
yes.
And so whatever that number is, I think we need to make sure that we say that. So we've got people that pay for school lunches, we've got people that pay for student fees. I just think it needs to be very clear. And hopefully it will be that we know what the number is and then what the rules are to the community that you donate, because there are people that are using outside entities
Mhm.
because they want to make sure that it goes directly there. So what about we also kind of had a question about, it's not donors choose, but it was the one for teachers.
It's usually donors
donors
choose.
choose?
Yeah, that's the biggest one. Yeah.
And then if people, what did we decide on the policy for if people want to buy equipment? Like, let's say a teacher says, hey, I need a projector, and someone says, oh, I'll order it for you, or they have an Amazon wish list.
Mhm.
Is it clearly defined here how that's going to go? I see it says follow donors' wishes, but what happens if it's off of like a wish list? Those are some of the questions that I think you all were going to kind of get back on.
Yeah, so I think, and jump in, Dan, I think, one of the key parts is you want to follow the donors. And I know we've had some conversation about not putting it in CPS jargon, like for the donors' wishes, because they don't know all our funds and what they're used for. Make sure that happens.
Well, we talked about if
For sure.
if a
Yeah, like if
person
you,
buys a projector,
Mhm.
that it would be CPS property.
it would be.
So how do we get around the fact that the donor says, I want that teacher to have it? So that those are just the things that I wanted clarification on, because teachers have asked, or people have asked, if I buy something for my classroom and let's say I move to a different school, what would be the rules on that? It doesn't stay with the school, or does it stay with the school, or does it stay with the teacher? I just think those things need to be clarified. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves here again because people are trying to usurp the whatever we're setting, and with good intention. I don't want to say
Yes.
Yeah, and
This is
then,
a quick follow-up.
Go
Where
ahead.
you go, Mike? I think one of the things, and this has happened in the past with the district, is also the nature of how people are giving things and donating, and centralizing a process to that. Because I think we had talked about it in the audit committee as well about, when folks want to track what people have done, what things we actually have. If you have someone who has a projector that no one knows about, for instance, right, because it didn't go through any steps or any processes, that's not any more helpful than if we are having it for a particular purpose. And so I think what this policy was supposed to get to a little bit of is having folks follow a process so that we can map out, to your particular question directly, if it's supposed to be donated to this person, follow them along their path along the way to make sure that's how we include that or how we list it.
I think with both of these policies, the administrative procedures support those policies are going to be critical. I mean, because we have to talk about things like technology is a good thing, right? Like, people love to donate technology, but there's plenty of technology that just does not work with all the other technology CPS has. And so we don't, you don't want the donor to think they're doing something good and the thing has to sit in a box because we can't plug it into our network, right? That's horrible, right? So it's about those sort of things, like making sure when you put your class wish list out there, that there's been some review that when this thing is provided, it's going to work, right? That's the most basic. Same thing administratively, like the projector example is a good one. Do we want to spend the time you know, if this teacher moves from school to school, we would have someone go out and unbolt the projector from that classroom and then put it in another classroom. And, you know, that's the cost of the district that we haven't anticipated. And I mean, you know, the answers could go either way in that thing, but those are the sort of things that administratively we have to work out.
So your question and sort of feedback on the policy is almost identical to the feedback that Board Member Weinberg, a former teacher herself, gave in policy this morning. And on the spot, I did not have a good answer for her, but having thought about it for an hour, I have a little bit better answer now. I think it's possible, and I think what she was asking is that the policy be updated to enable a donor, a family, somebody who wanted to donate specifically toward a teacher or a teacher's practice. She used the example of a teacher who is certified in a specialized program like Orton Gillingham, and that, you know, needed materials related to that be able to follow the teacher as opposed to the class. I think it's possible for us to perhaps write something like that in with a couple of caveats. One is, I think the campaign in that case needs to really be clear about what families or what somebody's donating to. We talked about it in terms of the crowdsourcing policy, which has also been proposed. So you would want, I mean, that teacher in that case would be using sort of our families, our school, our reputation to raise that money perhaps. And you would want people who were donating to know where that was going to go, that it wasn't, whether it was going to follow the teacher or whether it was going to stay with the classroom. You would want donors to be informed. The second piece is another reason to be careful there is in Ohio, the ethics law says that a public employee, teacher, lawyer, is unable to accept even a donation or a gift that is directed to themselves for doing their public job. So in other words, if a law firm said, Dan, we think you're doing a phenomenal job as the general counsel, and we think your salary needs to be increased, and we would love to just make $1,000
There is no subtle
donation
undertone there.
in Ohio, you're not allowed to accept that as a public employee for doing your job. And really the same rule would apply to a teacher. If even a generous family said, we'd love to just donate a projector to you and give it to you, there's some ethics issues. So long way of saying, I think it's good feedback both from Board Member Weinberg and you that we are going to make some adjustments to before we would present this to policy committee and the full board, I think.
Yeah, I really do. I've had where teachers, based on their reputation, not the district,
Right.
have received assistance because they've made applications to the board. Let's give you a worst case scenario. They've made applications to the board and it's taking a very long process to get done. And technology is by far the easiest. I'm not talking about software that needs to be applied. I'm talking about like a projector or a TV. So someone says, I'll buy the TV for you so you can show your kids whatever, or the projector. It's not going to be bolted down, so there's no personnel cost to it, but there's a need academically. And so that's what I'm not speaking about utilizing the district, because that's a whole other piece where PTOs have fundraisers and they use the district reputation and buildings and resources to have an event. That's what I think is more applicable for your example. But I am talking about if it's for the betterment of kids and it was given to that particular person specifically. And I can name that multiple times. And so I just would really like for us to be clear. Also, my question is there an ability to connect with the organizations like Amazon's wish list or Donors Choose to say, can we get this information on if one of our staff posts something and they list CPS, can we get that information so that it takes it off? I know you had spoken about that, Lauren, before, like there was some sort of
Yep. Go ahead, Lauren.
just so that it takes
Yeah.
it off of
Right.
the staff member to have to report.
Yeah, I think the spirit in which we've tried to approach this brainstorming is to get the best of both worlds, because the unintended consequence that we don't want to have is to limit the ability for our teachers, our community, those who are trying to do such good things for the schools. However, we would be remiss not to set some guidelines to help inform, educate, and put some boundaries So let's say, for example, a teacher or a lawyer does not have the awareness of that ethics law and just accepts the gift personally. They move on to a different district. They walk off with their $3,000 device that was donated to them as a person. Now they've broken an ethics law, which is a criminal offense. So we would love to strike that great balance between what are the rules that we must work within, to educate people on them. So I think it's just that fine line and balance. Via assets. So how it works for them is they
Just the item from the district, or like how would they say, I want this, and not break an ethics violation? Those, and you don't have to do the answer. But
Yeah,
I'm saying,
that's a good question.
How could they, if it was given to them and they were aware of the ethics potential violation, how could they say, hey, I really want this, and maybe it's a tax break, you know, like maybe we put this on, or maybe they can't, I don't know.
Dan's shaking his head, yeah.
Yeah,
I think we all know the answer.
yeah. I mean, I think what it would look like is that there may be some ability for us to say, you're donating to the district, but this teacher is going to benefit from it. That it's going to follow this teacher from class to class, or from. I think it's possible to do that. I actually don't think it's possible for somebody just to buy a TV for a teacher and say, this is your TV now. You know, in the same way that, much as those law firms really want to give me $1,000. No, I mean, I think it's really similar. Another example, lots of teachers have classroom. Colleges and universities very much want teachers to accept student teachers and to guide them and mentor them, and they provide a big service to these colleges and universities, and often are willing to pay the teacher $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 to be able to host this student teacher for the semester. And about, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, the Ohio Ethics Commission came out and said, can't accept the money. So we have helped to facilitate that by accepting the money on their behalf and then paying them. We can always pay them. So we've tried to work through that, but you know, the Ohio ethics rules are really tight on accepting from outside.
Yeah. My last question is around, we had an extensive conversation around our boosters clubs and our PTOs that are doing events, utilizing our district, but not recording that money. So, and I know 2 schools that do it. So, because I've participated in their event. So how does this work with those that do that? Because I know Jen expressed interest in wanting to monitor, and if a school has a foundation, we don't have any ability that I know of to do that, although we probably should. What plan is in place to be able to not restrict funds, because that's kind of another way that people go around the district. Again, people are finding ways to go around us and usurp us because of whatever policies we're putting in place. So I'm just trying to be cognizant of that and say, let's make it easy for things to be received. But I know that there are multiple schools that have foundations, from the elementary to the high school. Even, you know, so how does this count for that? And how does this count towards a foundation that receives a gift on behalf, like as a fiscal sponsor of someone that says, hey, okay, well, we'll just buy you a projector and we'll give it. How do we prevent that?
So there is a separate fundraising policy that
9212.
Huh?
9212.
9212. It's come up in our discussion before. but it's kind of like this three-headed hydra, right, of things. And so we've kind of said we'll defer that to after we kind of get these first two steps done to take a look at it. But it does talk about non-school organizations and the rules. It's
Booster clubs, friends of organizations, alumni associations, PTOs, PTAs are all what we would, in board policies, they're described as non-school organizations. And there is some accountability. Certainly they are a separate organization. They have their separate rules for what they can accept as checks, and all of that is separate, but it has to be an organization because they're trading on our good name and they're accessing our families and our alumni. They have to be set up to benefit our schools in a way that we agree to. And then there is some, if necessary, we have the ability to reach out to them for assurances related to financial accountability and things like that as a part of our policies. And that's the 9212 policy. It is very separate from what we're talking about here.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
it's a separate-
Correct.
That it receives to, so there's some parallel there, is my point.
Yep, with the same rules
There is,
applying,
you're
actually.
right.
So the gift from the Alumni Association or the class, that follows the same rules. Yeah.
I see what you're saying now.
Yeah.
So, but would it be that, since it was a school organization that donated it,
It's still a separate entity though.
okay,
I
so
mean-
even though it's part of the school.
It's still a separate entity.
It
It'd be a separate
would
entity.
follow-
I mean,
it
we would,
belongs to the-
yeah, we would
Yep.
still want it to, they'd still become property of the district, which they would want to show that, hey, this is what we did as an organization.
Yeah.
School this.
Mhm.
I mean,
A few alumni associations have done this in the past, and again, with whether it's building buildings, whether it's renovating spaces, they crowdsource the revenue on their own, provide it as a donation towards this particular project or service. I know at least one memory that I do have is of a group that used funds for students who with disabilities, provide like equipment and that type of stuff. That, again, to one of the points that General Counsel Owing was making, is that they donated to a particular program. So what they said is that we wanted to donate this equipment for this particular purpose with this particular program. And that was one of the ways that they felt it got to the students directly. It stayed with, regardless of whether or not, it was kind of a way to keep the program going, is the idea. So we do see that a lot, but I think Lauren was going to.
I was just going to add quickly, one thing that we've gone back and forth on, we've talked about as an administrative team and as, as external to that, of course, is the auditor, but how do you go about this work? And I think the scope on this creeps really quickly. That's what we've seen over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And so we finally kind of came together after all this research of what are our possibilities and said, if we can get some basic rules outlined via the policy we're discussing today, I think it will start to help us put one foot in front of the other and have that foundation to build. So then we can say, okay, here's our norm, here's what we're working from. And now what about these different scenarios? Okay, let's build on top of that, because as we've sat down, it quickly becomes very overwhelming because you think of all the different wonderful community members and routes and avenues and partners. So I just wanted to mention that I think hopefully getting these things outlined will set us up to make those next level decisions as well.
Well, I was gonna ask, how do other districts handle this? Do they have like a district foundation? Like, how do they handle this with other large districts,
There are district foundations, but they would work the same as another third-party support organization. So, I mean, for example, ABC is an organization that supports not just one school, but lots and lots of schools. And in some ways, we've talked about, they act just like a third-party support organization.
And I think it's, if I can just put a bow on it, Dr. Moffat, to your point about donors choose and about Amazon wish list, like one of the reasons for the policy is it gives us the ability to work kind of with these organizations. Right now, I mean, Lauren can tell you, it's kind of the Wild West, right? Right. We luckily we finally started getting reports, but there are teachers and schools doing all these things. And we really don't have an official policy in place to say, hey, here's what you should be doing. Or to say, hey, we're reaching out to you as an organization to help coordinate, right? And so that, I mean, that's one of the reasons we're working through this.
All righty. Let's keep us going here so we can get out a little earlier than Ms. Bolden would have us do. I know. The next thing on the agenda was the list of buildings for COPS. There's certificates on participation. I believe that is tasked with Kevin.
Yeah, so this will just kind of be a brief update. But Rob actually has it, and then you have a hard copy as well. So one of the things I did here was just trying to bring together what the facilities department had come up with as far as their master plan over the 5 years of FY25 to FY29. They have a much more detailed breakdown of all the potential projects that they would consider for each of those years. But in this exercise, just taking what that total is, so for FY25, that budget estimate is 36.9 million. Going through that list of items, the campuses that I listed at the bottom are the ones that our bond counsel has advised are encumbered by current COPS issues that are there, the certificates of participation. The first two, Gamble High School and Mercy, and then the cans was all part of a 2018 COPS issue. There were a couple other projects in that, for instance, LEAP, North Fairmount. But from her indication to us and reviewing the transcripts, these are the two campuses that are encumbered by the COPS issues. So if we were to do other work there, the assumption being that those probably wouldn't be eligible for that type of financing. The other ones that relate back to an original issue in 2006, this had some refundings in 14, 15, and 21, relate to Hughes High School, Western Hills University High School, Withrow, Walnut Hills, and Woodward. And so what I did here was, again, these are just estimates, and some of these certain projects may be split, and so those aren't included here. But if it was clearly identified for one of those buildings, I tried to capture those for each year. So in that first year, about 28% of that budget are things, the 10 million are things that would already be encumbered. Those buildings would already be encumbered, so COPS probably wouldn't be an option for those. The remaining 26 million potentially would. I'll point out, as the treasurer has mentioned, you know, anytime we use this financing, we have to make sure that we have the room, the capacity to make those annual payments to service the debt. So overall, over the 5-year period, about 15% is encumbered through the COPS, and the remaining 85%, or 137 million, would be eligible for COPS or other financing options. Yes. Yeah, their master plan project initially said 161. And like I said, estimating about 23 million of that work relates to those facilities.
And then again, the rule is that if a building is encumbered currently under a COPS, that you cannot do a new certificate for work on that same building, correct?
That's my understanding. I will say, like, the project that covers the majority of those, within the transcript, it would say new doors at 35 facilities. But from what I'm gathering from this is, even though there was a little bit of work on some of those buildings, the entire building was not encumbered because they were able to use the financing for minor pieces of that project.
So it would be really the encumbering of the building
is
what dictates whether or not we can re-encumber a building going forward. Okay.
So for instance, like Aiken High School is not encumbered. So if there was work to be done there, that would likely be, again, giving the ability to finance it, the ability to pay the payments, that building would be eligible for another COPS issue.
Clarify what I'm hearing, so that I'm understanding. If pending that we could make the payment, and let's just assume that that's fair. If we used one building for doors, but we needed to now use that building for a roof, we still couldn't use that building for a roof, even although only part of it was encumbered for a specific reason.
I think when I say she, or bond counsel through Dinsmore, when she's identified these from looking at the transcripts, I think any major work on those buildings would not be eligible for that. I'm pontificating on my own opinion that there may be smaller pieces of projects, for instance, doors, windows, those kind of things that you might be able to. Of course, our plan has a lot of work, so that likely we could bundle, okay, these buildings are non-encumbered, let's put all that work together and issue a COP. I think that's probably would be the way to go.
Because even though the building is encumbered, it could be used for other buildings too. So I'm asking, like, let's just list Walnut since it's here. Mm-hmm. And let's say Walnut has been encumbered previously for doors, but now Walnut needs a roof, and Aiken is non-encumbered. So could we use, but it needs something too. Yeah. So could we use Aiken to repair or to do the Aiken repairs, but then also to do a roof on Walnut, which has already been encumbered? So let's say we get a good deal on roofs. And they said, okay, we can do 3 roofs.
So to clarify the way I would understand, I think part of the COPS deal is a lease of the land and the building. So it works as like a capital lease. So essentially, we've turned the building over, if you want to say, and we're leasing it back. Mm-hmm. At the end, we're going to own it. But in the meantime, we are leasing the building. So I would say, for the most part, if that building falls under being encumbered, you would not be able to borrow against that building. You would have to borrow from another building. So again, you can borrow from Aiken to do any work you want to do at Aiken. You need a new roof at Walnut Hills. You could borrow the new roof, the money to make the roof at Aiken, and do that one through a COPS. But for Walnut Hills, you would have to use other financing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does.
And again, I think with COPS, I think the struggle we're always going to have with this is that we've done it so much within the district to fund part of previous facilities master plan, that it's not that we have buildings where we have minor encumbrances. We have buildings where you have like major things that we said we were going to do and that we were planning to do. And so it's the minor stuff are the things that we more than likely have not encumbered a building based upon. But like roofs, like Hughes is a good example where they have a whole annex that needs to be repaired. You're already encumbered. It's not exactly like we can re-encumber for those reasons. But well, thank you for that update, and I'm sure Ms. Bolton will be adding this back on for more discussion when she's available. Want to hit on the last one? I think that's on our agenda for folks who are here, unless Dan's going to cover the last 2. But at least the last one is the inventory of saleable property.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't here when that was brought up, but I understood the topic to relate to just informing the board of the properties that we have that I guess could be offered for sale. Is that what?
I think that's what.
It wasn't my
Okay.
Person with the agenda is not here at the moment.
I'll spend 2 minutes. I would say, in general, selling its property, the district's properties, has not been a great way for us to raise funds. From 2009 to 2016, the board sold, I think, 26 of its schools during that time and raised a grand total of $9.9 million for the sale of 26 schools. You would say, why would the board do that? The board did that because the Ohio General Assembly, in its infinite wisdom, said that schools that were holding on to any vacant properties or buildings at all were required to offer them for sale. which is incredibly frustrating because there have then been times when we've needed new buildings or new schools. So that's sort of background. I think there is a perception that CPS is like some holding on to some great property holdings that people don't know about, and where are these properties? That is simply like mythological. Nearly every property that the district has is a school that has students in it, with these exceptions, which I think almost everybody knows about. There is property at what used to be the Burton School. There is 13 acres there. It is shared by the Cincinnati Recreation Commission, has ball fields out there, and so that's sort of a shared property. But that is an area that we own, and that is vacant. The school's been torn down, and that's occasionally we get questions about whether that property would be for sale. Generally, it's not from big real estate developers. It has been from sort of groups that had a more philanthropic purpose and were asking in terms of a partnership more than a revenue generating opportunity. The old Heinold, not Heinhold, property that was used for many years as swing space as we were updating high schools, that is approximately 35 acres. It's out off of like across from where the old English Woods is. That is a property we regularly get inquiries about. There is interest in that property from developers. So it's certainly a site that could be sold, but I would say, again, that is really the last vacant land that the board owns. So if we are ever interested in doing some kind of a project where we were building a new, that is our last piece of vacant property. Other than that, we've got Jacobs, which is not entirely, that's on Winton Ridge out there. That is not there are administrative offices there. It's where the Promise Center is located, but not the entire building is even really able to be student. There would be significant improvements needed there. There's the Rawson House, which you've heard a lot about and you know about. That's right behind Clifton. And the only other sliver of property is off of Digby behind Hughes High School. It's the upper section of Coy Field. There is actually some interest from developers in selling that property, and we could move that forward. We've even had some sort of soft offers for that in the range of about $500,000. There's essentially 3 or 4 unused and abandoned tennis courts that are up behind some apartment buildings up there. At one point, somebody had tried to put like a skating, a roller hockey rink. It's grown over. It is not, and there is some interest in that. Understand there is a process the district has to follow to be able to sell that property. It first must offer it to charter schools, even though I can't imagine a charter school being interested. They get essentially a right of first refusal at an appraised value. So we would get an appraisal. We would offer it to charter schools at that appraised value. Then it has to be put up for auction. So it's not like we can just do this in a private sale. We can put a reserve on the auction. So we could say we're putting it up for auction, but we're not selling it for less than, let's say, something where we thought we had a soft offer. And then if it still doesn't sell at auction, then we have the ability to put it for a private sale. I believe those are really all the properties. I mean, the Hughes Annex is unused, but it's attached to Hughes.
And that process.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I was gonna say that process is also why we don't make money selling buildings.
That's right.
It's because, in large part, a lot of the buildings that we sold during that time, we sold at a substantially lower value than if they were sold in a private sale, in large part because of that process.
Very much so.
Whereas when we purchase property,
we do it at full market rate.
So we always lose dollars in bringing property back into the district.
We have occasionally had success trading. We do have the ability to trade property, and we've done that with the city. We did that very successfully, I think, in Silverton, traded properties and moved our school across the street to a village-owned park property. And we've done that a few other times, but yeah, please.
Do we have the ability, I kind of it's thought about this option with regards to like Jacob Center or the old Key building. It's good. I'm dating myself. To enter into a partnership with like the county or the city in order to rehab that building. You know, do we have the ability rather than sell, but to partner to rehab? Like as long as we own it, we can do whatever to that we wanted to.
Yes, we have the ability to do whatever we want to the properties. There is the same restrictions on long-term leases that we have with sales, but we have partnered with, some examples like the health center that was built onto the Academy of World Languages. That was a partnership with Community Learning Center Institute, City of Cincinnati. They essentially funded the construction of an extension to the building that serves as a community health center, and now it's run, I believe that's a Cincinnati Health Department site. So we've done that at times. Generally, there has to be kind of a mutual financial interest, but there's been projects that have been done along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yes, please.
I know that COPS is involved with buildings and COPS be used for land.
So the only thing I would add to what I think Kevin already I thought his presentation was good, is that it likely depends on whether you can convince a bank to enter into the transaction. So I think Kevin's right that property that already is leveraged in any way is less attractive to a bank that we're trying to go get financing from. You're essentially asking for like a second mortgage there, right? Like,
No, I get that.
Yeah.
I completely, Kevin did a great job.
Yeah.
My question is different, not about the process, but about the ability to leverage assets. So we're talking about buildings where there's a parcel on that property. I'm talking about the land value. So if we own 35 acres at Heidel, that has value. Could we get a loan off of the land? If the land, let's say it's $1 million an acre, I'm being very optimistic, and we own it, so that's an asset of $35 million. Could we, in essence, get a COPS off of the value of that? And I don't know, has that ever been done? I guess is my question.
I think it's possible. I'm not an expert on COPS. I think it is possible. We have lots of assets that might be attractive to serve as a securing essentially a loan. That's really, COPS is, the only reason we use COPS is because we're not allowed to mortgage. Just so but it's essentially the same thing.
Okay.
The problem is, it makes, for lots of businesses, I think it makes sense to go out and get a loan to expand your business or whatever, because the idea is you'll make more revenue on it. Most of the needs that the district has right now aren't necessarily going to generate more revenue for us. And that I think is a major, so when the treasurer or Kevin says we need to really be worried about the service payments, the expenses that we are putting on future budgets by agreeing to a loan now are really significant if there's not a new revenue source.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that it is the right way.
Right.
I'm asking more about
Possible.
has that ever been done? I'm because we have a significant number of buildings already encumbered. Could we replace some of that value with land? That's my question. Now, whether or not we should is a whole different issue, but I'm wondering about, we're speaking only about buildings, so could we also use land?
I would think it's unlikely, because I think a bank would say, okay, it's a vacant piece of land, we can walk away from that. We don't need to renew that lease for a vacant land. Where if it's a school building that we're leasing back to us, there is an opportunity to walk away from the COPS, let's say, if you don't appropriate the money and you choose it. Now, is that going to affect your credit rating? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that's why typically, happen. But I think that would make it difficult to do that on a piece of land. I think it would have to be on an actual facility.
So it's never been done, is my question.
Not to my knowledge, I don't think so.
That was my question.
All right.
Plus, I think the volatility of the market would be an issue too.
But if we have interest, then it's obviously sellable from a real estate standpoint.
Yeah.
So that's an asset to us, which is why.
It's yeah,
Absolutely.
and again, when we think about our properties, a lot of our properties are of value to someone else. That's why they express interest. They also recognize that there are restrictions on how much we can charge them for it. So they are not in some high, this is not the same fun of a high acting like audit or auction and that idea of like they're going to keep spending more money to us, which is why they lowball us all the time with offers. But well, in absence of anything else regarding the, I'm assuming this is Title I report or T1 report.
It's actually transportation. But
Yes. Okay. Well, absence of anyone who has any information on this, we will table this agenda item to another meeting. Rob, are there any folks who'd like to make comments? No? Well, despite my best efforts to get us out here in 12 minutes, we still are probably in record time for a budget, finance, and growth meeting. With no further work to be done, I call the meeting adjourned.